Hi, this is Matt Baney, managing editor of the Lewiston Tribune, and this is the Lewiston Tribune podcast, episode number 31. I'm joined today, we got a doubleheader for our viewers today. I'm joined by Emily Pierce of the Moscow Pullman Daily News, and a little later on, we're going to have Laura Guido on. And today we've got all things politics we're talking about. Emily covered a visit to WSU by Charlie Kirk, a conservative commentator. And we're going to talk to Laura later on about Charlie Kirk coming to Boise, and as well as Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez coming to Nampa. Laura is also going to talk to us about the Idaho legislature that just wrapped up recently. Emily, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
You bet. And before we get started with Emily, just a quick reminder that the Lewiston Tribune podcast is available on YouTube at lmtribune.com and on all the podcast apps. So please be sure to subscribe. And we have a new episode each week. So here's this week's episode. Emily, you were at the Charlie Kirk event on the WSU campus in Pullman on Thursday. Tell us what the scene was like there.
Well, Matt, it was held on Wazoo's campus over in Terrell Mall, which is where a lot of students gather for a library or different kinds of things, kind of like Moscow's Hello Walk. And when you got up there was hundreds of people waiting for Charlie Kirk to come on stage. It was a good mix of folks. It looked like students and also community members from around the region came over to watch Kirk talk. I talked with some folks, and some people came down all the way from Coeur d'Alene and others from Palouse. So it was a good mix of people.
Of course, he's made, tell us a little about who Charlie Kirk is, please.
Yeah, so Charlie Kirk is a well-known conservative personality. He has his podcast, The Charlie Kirk Show, where he often debates students and other people on, I guess, contentious issues around the nation, anything really in the public eye. And he'll go on for hours just talking about different types of points. He's also an author, and he has his foundation, Turning Point USA, which provides news to his conservative audience, or really just audience members who tune in.
And his event Thursday went how long?
It was 3 hours long. It was out there in the sun. I'm worried we'd all get sunburnt. But it was really just back after back. He invited dozens of spectators up to, I guess, get his takes on popular issues and things about politics, including Trump's tariff policies, immigration, and other issues like abortion and gender-affirming care.
Did you say how many people who got up and confronted him or spoke, how many were in opposition to his points of view, and were there some that were in agreement with him?
I think most, if not all. There were a few people who came up and thanked him for having the opportunity to talk about and just like have this discussion. One of his supporters was a Washington State University student who had talked about being a part of an alleged assault in Pullman. He was getting food and was wearing his red MAGA hat, and two men approached him, one being a student teacher at Washington State University, and they reportedly beat him for wearing his political apparel.
And that's happened a few months ago, and it was perhaps Charlie Kirk's channel that kind of first reported on it. And of course, it's all allegedly right now, and they were the two men who allegedly confronted him, they've been charged with, is it fourth degree assault?
Yes. Yeah.
Charlie, I'm sure, was very sympathetic to the student who got beat up allegedly.
Yeah. He said a few words, just kind of how, I guess, addressing how divided that this country is, and even went to say that if this had happened to a Kamala Harris supporter, then the event would have been a #1 news story across the country.
Hmm. Well, there's one that stood out. What other moments in Charlie Kirk's appearance kind of stood out to you, Emily?
I think for me, it was Kirk's opinions on the United States' influence in foreign affairs, one being Donald Trump's approach to tariffs. Um, it's, I guess the topic came up when an individual approached him with concerns about a recession coming from imposing these tariffs. I know just a week or two ago, when his new rush of I guess tariffs came in, the stock market took quite a hit. The Associated Press reported that markets crashed to levels that were seen during the pandemic. And Trump's strategy is to kind of bring countries to the table and use it as a negotiation tactic. And he also claims that it would bring in new revenue for the United States Treasury. But the question comes, when who will take on the burden of these costs? Will it be these companies who are shipping goods and trading in between, or will it be burdened onto the consumer? Kirk had a couple of things to say about this. One being that the tariffs being tried as an economic superpower hadn't been done before, and that we need to give this more time to see how it works, as well as questioned experts' opinions on if a recession is coming or not. He said that these experts had lost all credibility with the American people over the past years, and referenced prices of eggs and oil that people had been worrying about at the beginning of the year, supposedly dropping in price during Trump's 80 days in office.
Well, others, of course, would push back on those points, but that's what these debates are about. So, besides Charlie Kirk's fans who were there, I imagine were there opponents of his that made their voices heard at the event on Thursday.
There were a group of Washington State University students who came to protest. They set up a booth on the side of the event, and around 24 were holding signs and making their presence known. I talked with one organizer, and she said that they were there to show that LGBTQ plus individuals exist, while Kirk has been overtly opposed to the community, as well as offering a positive distraction while he was there setting up shop and talking. You could hear them chant, "What do we want? Justice. When do we want it now?" throughout the whole event.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was probably an interesting thing to be at, just to see so many passionate people.
Had the opportunity to talk with some spectators, and who described the event as a once in a lifetime opportunity, having someone with such big influence coming to a town as small as Pullman.
And there were students there, of course, but non-students as well.
Yeah, it was quite a crowd, hundreds of people. It looked like, just from talking and getting to know some folks at the event, some came down all the way from Coeur d'Alene or out into the smaller Whitman County towns like Palouse to get a look and see what Kirk had to say and debate about.
All right. Well, thanks, Emily. Interesting coverage you had in today's paper, and thanks for those details about it. Anything else about this event stand out that we might want to know about?
Kirk also talked about Trump's views and, I guess, his own opinions on immigration. A person was concerned about the Abrego Garcia case, if anyone is familiar with it. He was a man who had been deported to an El Salvador prison after being accused of being part of a gang. And the Trump administration, I guess the Associated Press reported that they claim that they can't do anything to bring him back after federal appeals courts ordered to facilitate his return. The issue that was brought up is violations of due process and rights to a speedy trial, where these individuals are being sent supposedly without any due process. But Kirk, he said that the American left has gone out of its way to fight for foreigners who had, quote, broken into our land and committed crimes. He questioned Garcia's, I guess, influence with gang culture, and even brought up some supposed incidents involving domestic violence, and said that the I guess Democratic Party, or the American left, as he puts it, goes out of its way to fight for foreigners instead of, I guess, leaving behind these American citizens and men and women of our country.
Okay. All right, Emily. Great. Thanks for your report on that. And it was nice to chat with you. Thanks for joining the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Hello, Laura. How are you?
Good. How are you?
You've covered the legislature, and you've been hyper-focused, of course, on what our statewide lawmakers are doing. But just this week in Boise, there were visits from some national figures. Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez came to Nampa, and they had a rally at the Idaho Center. I know you didn't cover that, but can you kind of tell us what you gleaned, what was that was like?
Yeah, so they're on a tour and focus on, they say, fight the oligarchy. I know that it was packed in the Fort Idaho Center. It's a pretty big venue. I don't know exactly how many people were there, but it was full. There were some counter-protesters there. The focus was really on the issues they see with President Trump and his executive orders, and actions of Elon Musk. And there was really this emphasis on not letting the country be run by billionaires who are, they think, acting in their own interest at the detriment to everyone else.
Charlie Kirk, a conservative sort of media figure, he appeared at Boise State, right?
He did. He has kind of his deal is he goes to college universities and debates college students on controversial issues, and he has got a big banner that says "Prove me wrong." And it also drew a really big crowd, and it was kind of a mix, it sounded like, of a lot of people, cheering when he would say stuff, and then a lot of people there to just fight with him. It sounded like it had kind of mixed responses from students. Some people thought, it's good to have these discussions and have discourse with people who disagree with you. And then other people argued that, like, well, he comes in just ready to fight with you, and it doesn't really move the conversation forward. Some people also take issue with the fact that he's a 31-year-old man, and he only really debates like college students who are most of the time much younger. And but it sounded like there was some interesting discussions. They covered abortion and transgender identity, and I think some other issues as well. But it sounded like there were a lot of kids there, even though it was in the middle of the day.
Well, it's interesting. This state, of course, I think nationally can be a bit of an afterthought. It's seen as reliably conservative, and therefore maybe, not a place where there's a lot of deviation in attitude. Anyway, it's interesting to see national figures like Bernie and AOC and Charlie Kirk come here. And anyway, it almost seeing those crowds at both events, it kind of seemed like I wonder if people are, there's sort of course, there's so much interest now in the national scene that I'm sure it kind of got people excited to kind of be part of the national scene, maybe, which might explain the turnout at those events. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, obviously, all three of those people are big names nationally and very familiar names. So I think people kind of on all ends of the political spectrum were interested in hearing what they had to say.
Yeah. Do you you do a good job, of course, of focusing on the Idaho legislature. When you're doing that, do you have much time or space in your brain to look at the national scene, or are you pretty focused during the session?
I would say work-wise, I definitely try and keep an eye on things that will affect Idaho. One of the things I've been trying to keep an eye on is the budget that the U.S. House passed and how that reconciliation process is going to go, because the House one would cut significantly Medicaid, and there's a lot of people in Idaho on Medicaid, and so I think that would have a pretty significant impact. That's something I've been trying to keep an eye on, and more recently, Congressman Mike Simpson signed on as a co-sponsor to the Keep Public Lands in Public Hands Act, which would make it harder for federal government to sell off federal lands, especially like big tracts of land, which like 2/3 of Idaho is federal land. So that would have a significant impact here. And I think a lot of people value our wilderness areas and forest land, and but a lot of people would like to see it privately managed. So I think that's something I also want to keep an eye on.
Laura just wrapped up her third year covering the Idaho legislature, and so we're going to talk about that today. We're a little more than a week out from the legislature wrapping up. I guess, this was your third one. Can you tell us how did this one compare to the first two?
So this one was right after an election, and it was a pretty significant election in that a lot of incumbents were ousted in the primary. So that definitely made an impact. There were a lot of new faces, and there was also a new presidential administration, and the tone definitely was different from the previous 2 years that I had covered, just because there was a lot more confidence that President Trump would be supportive of the things that Idaho is trying to do. And before there was a lot of like resolutions saying, urging Congress to do more on immigration or things like that. Whereas this year there was a lot more confidence that the state's going to pass its own immigration laws and feel confident that those will be upheld, even though the makeup of the courts are currently the same, but still just a generally more of feeling that the things that they're trying to do at the state level will be supported at the federal level.
Okay. So with that in mind, what were some of the noteworthy bills, maybe the ones that will kind of really take note of in the years to come?
Yeah, a couple historic bills. I mean, the House Bill 93 was the school choice tax credit bill, and that's the first time that the state's going to allow state money to go towards private K-12 education. It's noteworthy that right now we have Idaho Launch, which is for graduating seniors, and that goes towards like colleges in some cases. So, and some of those are private. But this is the first time it's really been done in K-12 education. It's $50 million. Parents can apply for a tax credit of up to $5,000 per student, or $7,500 if they have a student with a disability. It was very contentious. I mean, it was reported that something like 86% of people had contacted the governor's office asking him to veto it. But it was a priority of Governor Little gave in his State of the State. It was a priority of leadership. So there's been a lot of pressure to pass something, and so they did that this year.
If you can, Laura, talk a little bit about the Medicaid situation, where that stands now.
Yeah, so Medicaid is always a major discussion in the legislature because it's now, if you count the federal and state money, it's the biggest budget in the state. And one of the main kind of targets of folks who want to reduce spending in that is Medicaid expansion. So there were two bills. One would have just straight repealed Medicaid expansion. That one didn't get very far. But then there was another one that had like 11 conditions that Medicaid expansion would have to meet. And those kind of changes require permission from the federal government. So basically they'd have to receive 11 separate waivers from the federal government by next year, or it would get repealed. The federal government isn't known for working super quickly, and just the timeline itself would have been make it pretty much impossible. So it would have repealed Medicaid expansion, and then it would have left around 90,000 is the last I saw, or 83,000 people just without insurance. So that one passed the House and didn't go anywhere in the Senate.
There's usually a few cultural type bills that end up getting brought up, and some passed. And it was interesting. You had a story just this week about Attorney General Raul Labrador telling the city of Boise to not fly flags that aren't approved under a law that went into effect about which flags you can fly, government entities can fly. Can you tell us a little bit about that, both the law and then the situation with the city of Boise?
Yeah, so there are actually two flag-related bills that passed this year. One was just for schools, and one was for government entities and buildings. They're roughly the same in that they basically said the only flags you can fly are from this limited list. That bill went into effect as soon as Governor Little signed it, which happened April 3rd. And the city of Boise has a pride flag up, and then another flag honoring organ donors, and has basically said that they plan to keep flying them, that they have no intention of taking them down. And the bill, as it's written, doesn't have any penalty necessarily for government entities that don't comply. So this week, the Ada County Sheriff's Office sent a letter basically saying we keep getting all these complaints, but we've determined we can't do anything. And the Attorney General wrote a letter asking her to take them down, basically saying, like, they don't have penalties right now, but there are plans to come back and change that to add some. And that penalty that they're planning is to withhold sales tax revenue that smaller taxing districts get from the state.
It was interesting in your story about the Boise situation that, generally county sheriffs aren't critiquing lawmakers on how to write bills, but you had the Ada County Sheriff saying that lawmakers maybe need to get a little help when they're writing these to have a penalty in the law.
He did make a comment saying, we maybe that should be considered when lawmakers are creating legislation. I got the impression that Sheriff Clifford felt like he was in a bind. He said that he'd been receiving a number of complaints, and he said, well, there's nothing, it's not necessarily a criminal statute, or if it is, I don't know if it's a misdemeanor or or who to pursue charges against and what those would be. And so he's like, without that, I can't do anything to enforce this law. Yeah, so lawmakers are well aware that once the budget passes, they have no reason to stick around anymore. So you'll often see some budget bills, being held hostage in one chamber and others so that they can negotiate getting their policy priorities through on the other side. So there's always like a budget that's going to pass, but they hold it on their calendar for a while. And that definitely happened this year. It was also, I think, a lot harder for budgets to get through this year for a number of reasons. One was JFAC is the budget writing committee, was kind of operating on new rules. There were rules, but they also hadn't adopted official rules. So they were kind of going off of what they'd been told by their leaders. And it's a joint committee, so there's House and Senate members, and there was some slight disagreement from House leaders and Senate leaders about exactly how they should be passing budgets. So that caused some, I think, I don't know if issues is the right word, but definitely held up some budgets. And there's also a lot of people on that committee and just who were elected this year who pretty much didn't want to vote for any budget.
The overall budget that did end up passing, can you tell us what's kind of noteworthy about it?
Well, so in a year where budgets were kind of struggling and on the floor over relatively, in the scheme of state budgets over relatively small expenditures, there was a huge increase to the state's child welfare division, which isn't called that anymore, but basically the division of health and welfare that oversees the foster care system. There was, I think, a 20% increase, and that was really under the vision of the new director, who's actually going to be leaving soon. Alex Adams came in and said, I want to have a laser focus on improving foster care, and that's where I need a budget that's going to support that vision. I added a bunch of new staff, and a lot of them are going towards prevention, so putting staff in people's homes to address issues before a kid might have to, so they maybe don't have to get removed. They can stay in the home, but they can have staff go in there and make sure it's still safe for those kids to be there. And then other staff going towards improving responsiveness for foster families to try and reduce turnover of foster families, which has been an issue, and increase the number of families that are available, so that because at the moment, it's getting closer, but at the moment there are fewer foster families available than there are foster kids. So that creates some complications, especially if a kid has to be removed in an emergency situation. Sometimes they don't have a place to put that kid. So, and then they have to go into congregate care, which is really expensive and not ideal for the kid. So, some pretty major investments in that program. And then, like I said, it's extra noteworthy because it was in a year where a lot of lawmakers were not wanting to grow budgets to quite that scale.
One thing I forgot to bring up, but should, of interest to folks in north central Idaho, there was a lot of talk about the WWAMI program, the WWAMI medical agreement, the 50-year-old WWAMI medical agreement that the University of Idaho was a founding member of. And this is a collaborative, schools in the West band together, and it's a program to train up more physicians. And the legislature was looking at perhaps removing Idaho from WWAMI, and that debate went kind of back and forth the whole session. Can you tell us where it ended up washing out at the end of the session this year, Laura?
Yeah, so a bill about medical education and WWAMI did move forward, but it was eventually amended to say that there could be a decision to cut 10 seats from the WWAMI program, but there doesn't need to be, whereas before the bill would have definitely cut 10 seats and then tried to put that money that would go towards those seats towards another institution, which looks like it was likely going to be the University of Utah, which was a lot less controversial than where it started, which was the first bill that was proposed was just going to completely withdraw Idaho from the program within the next 2 years and put all those seats into likely the University of Utah.
Can you predict what'll be the big issues going into the next legislative session? And I guess, and again, we'll cut you some slack here. You don't have a crystal ball, but I guess maybe issues that got brought up this session that you might expect would be big ones next year.
There's one bill that had been introduced and made it through the Senate that would have put some clarifications around the parental consent law that was passed last year. Basically, after that law was passed, there were issues coming up of it basically took away kids' rights to consent to medical care under any situations without parental consent. But then there were some complications with that came up where, a kid came in with a broken leg, which isn't necessarily like a life-threatening emergency, but they couldn't get a hold of the parents, and doctors were like, well, the way the law is written, we can't treat this kid. There were also issues where kids were potentially being abused by their parents or sexually abused, and in order to get like a rape kit, they'd have to ask the parents for consent, and it might be the parent that's doing the abuse, and that's definitely an issue. That issue didn't get resolved this year.
All right, Laura, thank you. Appreciate all your insight. Interesting stuff. I'm sure we'll have you back again sometime soon. We'll talk more about statewide politics. Maybe one of these days we got to do one that's not about politics. That might be a nice change up, right?
Yeah, maybe we'll catch up once Cougar football starts up.
There you go. Sounds good. All right, Laura, thanks a lot for joining us. And thank you for listening to this episode of the Lewiston Tribune podcast. We'll be back again next week with a new topic. And until then, have a great day. Bye-bye.